A Guten Erev Shabbos. If anyone asks you why the Jewish people sit down and have a Seder on Passover night, you can give them the answer from this week's Torah portion. It's actually a four-part answer from four passages that tell us to tell the next generation. Three of those are in Parshas Bo El Paro, our Sedra this week. The fourth is a little bit down the road in Va'eschanan, which we'll read over the summer. It's good to think about summertime too. You'll recognize these as the four children, or four sons, as we used to say back in the day when we said such things. Four types of questions that you might be asked. Now, let's start with straight up halacha, and we'll learn from there. We'll learn it from there. If you're making your Seder alone, chas v'chalila, as many of us had to do a few years ago, there's no one to ask you the questions. There's no one to answer or listen to your explanations. Do you skip this part of the Seder? Skip this part of these pages of the Haggadah? No way. One person sitting alone at a Seder asks all the questions and gives all the answers. So if you have two people at your Seder, you're already in bonus territory. That's a great Seder. Two people talking to each other, which is fantastic. With that perspective, we come to appreciate our wealth and good fortune if we've ever been to a Seder with 8, 15, or 20, or 30 people around the table. Now, why is one enough and two is so extra? Because the Torah tells us that the child should ask. Maybe you've had the youngest person at your Seder ask the questions. Maybe you've been that child or wish you had been that child. The fact is, we all have a child in us who asks these questions, and that's a beautiful thing. In fact, if you have not asked yourself the good questions, it'll be difficult for you. You won't be that well equipped to answer any children or anyone else for that matter. So let's look at what it says. We have three passages in this week's portion. Bo. Come to Pharaoh is how, Bo El Paro, come to Pharaoh is how this one begins. This Sedra begins. So there's a verse in the fifth Aliyah, which says, it shall be when your children say to you, what is this service to you? V'haya ki yomru aleichem b'neichem ma ha'avodah hazos lachem. There's another two in a later Aliyah, in the seventh Aliyah, and it shall be when your son will ask you at some future time, what is this? You shall say to him, with a strong hand, Hashem removed us from Egypt, from the house of bondage. V'haya ki yish'alcha bincha machar lemor mazois v'amarta elav b'choizek yad haitzianu ad Hashem mitzrayim mibeis avadim. And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, it is because of this that God acted on my behalf when I left Egypt. V'higata levincha b'yomahu lemor ba'avur zeh as Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim. Combine these three with the one other passage in Dvarim and Deuteronomy, which is Ki yishalcha bincha machar lemor ma ha'edos v'hachukim v'hamishpatim asher tziv Hashem elokeichem eschem. What are the testimonies and decrees and the ordinances that God, your God, commanded you? Put these all together, and you have four types of children there. Ma ha'edos, what are the testimonies and decrees and ordinances? That's the wise child, the chacham. You have ma ha'avodah hazos lachem. What is all this to you, the wicked one? You have ma zot, mazois. What is this, simple son? And then you have the verse that says, you shall tell your child on that day, v'higata levincha. If you look carefully, there was really no question asked there. That's the one who doesn't know how to ask, or the child who has not yet learned how to ask. She'eino yodei lishol. Many different ways to spin the translation there. V'higata levincha, tell your child, is what we're doing at the Seder. By the way, the Yerushalmi, that's the source for this four children thing, learns it as if it's four different children, which makes the illustrations and the Haggadah a lot more entertaining. Pashat Pshat, the simple meaning of the verses, says Rav Bazak from the Gush, it's all one child. These four different types of questions, four separate questions maybe even, all come from the same kid, the same questioner. At your Seder, you could spend the whole night on this. Are there four different types of people asking, or are they all the same person with many different types of questions? Others say it's four generations, the immigrant, their children, their grandchildren, so on. Others say it's the question that a person asks or people ask at different stages over the span of their own lives. Please remember, you're supposed to be in shul by 9:15 on the first day of Pesach for Shachris. Okay, how do we think about these? The Arizal taught that the 4 cups of wine parallel the 4 sons. So Kiddush goes with the Chacham, Magid goes with the Rasha, benching with the Tam, the simple one, and Hallel that we sing for the one who doesn't even know how to ask. What's noteworthy in this arrangement is that the cup of Magid, which we spend the most time on, is for the Rasha, the wicked son. Just as interesting that the wise and knowledgeable child is parallel to the first cup, Kiddush, which is usually checked off the list the first 5 minutes of the Seder. So according to that, it's very interesting indeed that we spend the most time on the second cup of wine, second of the 4 cups, which goes with Magid, telling the story, which is parallel to the Rasha, the wicked son. We also seat him or her next to the Chacham, right? The wise one. We're not worried that the wicked son is going to rub off on the wise one. We're hoping that the wise one will be wise enough to stop paying attention to how wise he is and pay some attention to his brother sitting next to him who's feeling alienated. It also calls to mind the story of a certain Malamed in a certain town in the old country who was heard to say the Echad in the Haggadah, in this part of the Haggadah, with each of the children. It says Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, one who is wise, one who is wicked. He used this, Malamed used the same Echad that he used for saying the Shema. Echad Chacham, Ve'echad Rasha. Seeing the holiness, the godliness, the divine image in each of the children or kinds of children or the questions, whatever. This is the ultimate expression of inclusion because our Seder is incomplete without all 4 children and their questions there being asked, or with the one child with all their questions, if you read it that way. And then again, there's another dimension of incompletion. After the war, people started speaking about the 5th son. There's another child who should be at the table, but that child is missing. Maybe she's off in Kathmandu. Maybe he's surfing in Hawaii. Maybe, as in Elie Wiesel's novel, The 5th Son, it's the child that the parents had before the war, who perished in the Shoah. But in the memory of his parents, that child is still sitting there at the Seder table. Rabbi Norman Lamm, the late president of Yeshiva University, once gave a drasha on the 4 sons, but he turned the lens around and made it into a mirror. He looked at 4 types of parents, and he says they're all found in one single verse of our portion, Parshas Bo, where it says, "You shall tell your child, your son, that day, saying, it's because of this that God acted on my behalf when I left Egypt. V'higarta levincha b'yom hahu, le'mor ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li, Rabbi Lamm says the first kind of parent is suggested by the first word, V'higarta, you shall tell. What's this parent? A domineering parent. The parent tells, they lecture, they instruct, they don't listen, they don't engage. God bless them, they should have a lichtigen Gan Eden, those Zaydas who sat at the head of the Seder table with the Kittel and read the Haggadah. People tell me this story again and again. They always use the word droning when they share the memory. The kids had to sit quietly and listen to the Haggadah being declaimed in Hebrew, which the kids didn't really understand. Those Zaydas were doing their best, but they were only fulfilling the Higadata. You should tell, as in you shall lecture. It was not very engaging. It was not very motivating, to our sorrow. Nobody listened. Nobody learned except what not to do. And so no one really connected. Rabbi Lamm says this parent himself is really also a she'eno yodea lish'ol. That parent has not learned how to ask, how to engage the people around the table with questions. He says that a parent who does not bother to ask raises a child who no longer cares to ask. He also notes 2 types of domineering parents here. One who's observant and tries to force his kids, bully them is the term Rabbi Lamm uses, into observance, and another one, even worse, a parent who was once observant, and no longer really is, but he wants the children to be observant. Good luck with that one. The second kind of parent, he says, is the wise one. That's queued up by Emor Lo. Speak to him about the laws and the meanings of the Passover. The wise parent knows you can't force anything, but you can open a conversation, and hopefully your words and your sincerity will make an impression. Rabbi Lamb puts an interesting spin on Vehigadata, which we said in Hebrew is a stronger, even harsher you shall tell. In Aramaic, it can mean to attract. Rabbi Lamb says that's the difference between pushing a child to do something versus drawing the child along in something. It's a big difference. His third kind of parent he calls the wasp parent, the wannabe non-Jew. For him, it's all about leaving Mitzrayim. That's a symbol of leaving the old ways behind. This guy would leave the Jewish people if he could. He tells his kids that anti-Semitism, it's a thing of the past. There's really no difference between the Jews and anybody else. And then he has no answer, nothing to say to his kids when they get called a Jew on campus, and a colonialist, and an enabler of genocide, and who knows what else. This is the one who looks at us in our yarmulkes and our hats and our talesim and says, ugh, why do they have to dress that way? Why do they have to be different? As if trying to look the same ever made it any better. Then there's a fourth parent, what Rabbi Lamb calls, you should pardon the expression, the democratic father. We're not getting political here. This parent doesn't want to ask anything. He doesn't want to impose anything. He reads, Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li. God did this for me. But it's your choice what you do with your life. I'm not telling you anything you have to do. It's the opposite of the domineering father. This one is, in a very real sense, afraid to make a request, afraid to ask the children around the table to do anything. Rabbi Lamb goes into great detail. It's worth looking at this talk. And he ends with the call from the Haftorah of Shabbos Hagadol, from Malachi, the prophet Malachi, that God turns the hearts of the parents to the children and the hearts of the children to the parents. One other view on the four children comes from the late, great Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, whose words continue to inspire us. About 10 years ago, Rabbi Sacks gave a conference call just before Pesach, and he spoke about the Arba Banim, 4 sons, memorable on many accounts, among them because he gave no less than 4 different perspectives in how to look at the wicked child, the Rasha, or as he translated it, the contrary child. The Haggadah usually says the wicked child. He translated the contrary child. And this one asks, what is the meaning of this avodah, this ceremony or work to you? Saying to you, we usually understand that the child excludes himself or herself from the group and denies a basic principle of our faith. What basic principle? Sacks's first perspective was the mere fact of excluding themselves from the group. When you don't recognize that all Jews are in covenant with each other and with God, that itself denies a basic principle of our faith. For ourselves today, let's keep in mind the notion that throughout this past year, we've been learning a harsh lesson about this very topic. Think back a year ago, Pesach, really a year ago now in January or February. In Israel, Jews were very sharply divided against one another. And here too, in North America, we took sides with this side or that side. Taking sides against each other is rarely good. Maybe we should say never good, but in case there's an exception, we'll cover all the bases. Anyway, on October 7th and since, we've learned the hard way that at essence, there really is no meaningful distinction among Jews. We are all in this together. Sachs's second explanation is that the contrary child says, what is the meaning of this to you? He says it, the child says it, he doesn't ask it. Since he's saying rather than genuinely inquiring, it suggests he really doesn't want an answer. He just wants to make the point that he doesn't connect with it. He doesn't really want to be engaged or brought into the conversation. It's the end of a conversation. He says it, but it's not, and it closes the door to further engagement. The third answer Rabbi Sacks gave, based on the Gemara Yerushalmi, the child says, what is all this avodah, this service, this hard work to you? He says, what's the difference? We used to have to do avodah, hard work, for Pharaoh. Now we do avodah for Hashem. Hard work is hard work. What's the difference? Which master you're serving? Or if you exchange one for the other. Rabbi Sacks says, it makes all the difference in the world. Serving Pharaoh for his good is a world of difference than serving God, who asks us to do mitzvot, which is ultimately for our own good. The other side to the explanation is that this contrary child does not understand an essential point, important now maybe more than ever, which is that freedom is hard work. It's not just enough to cast off the authoritarian leader. To ensure freedom, this is Rabbi Sachs's words, to ensure freedom and guarantee it for others is key. To be able to say, I will not purchase my freedom at the cost of yours. Otherwise, if you're not willing to do the hard work, you do simply exchange one taskmaster for another, and you will not escape the cycle of enslavement. Sachs's fourth explanation of the Ben Rasha changes not the words, but the trope, the intonation, the tune you use when you say it. What is all this avodah, this hard work to you? The child says, I know what you want it to be to me. You sent me to Hebrew school. You got me a bar mitzvah teacher, a bat mitzvah teacher. You want me to be Jewish. But tell me, mom and dad, what does it mean to you? What do you think of all this? Is this just a cultural trapping, or does it really resonate deeply with you? That's the challenge of this child. He cannot stand the contradiction. You wanted me to get into the best schools. You wanted me to get the best grades in math and science. One time I got an 89. You acted like it was the end of the world. But when I skipped a bar mitzvah lesson or two, you said, oh, well, kids will be kids. You wanted me to go study in Israel because that's what people do. And now I want to stay a second year. And you ask me, am I becoming a fanatic? You want me to be Jewish, but not too Jewish. What is this story, dear parents? What does it really mean deep down to you? In his Yom Kippur talks, Rabbi Sachs wrote a pretty interesting thing. He says, for the last 200 years, we've been working hard trying to make Judaism easier, lighter. Change this, drop that, relax this. What's been the result? People leaving Judaism in droves. What's the hardest holiday to prepare for? Pesach. What holiday do most Jews keep? Pesach. What single day is the most difficult to observe? Yom Kippur. When do you see most Jews throughout the entire year? When do people show up to shul? For Kol Nidre, for Yom Kippur. Rabbi Sachs says, maybe we've made a mistake in making things easier. Maybe that was not the best strategy. Maybe there's something in people that wants to have something asked of them. They want to be able to rise to the challenge. So, this is our moment. Here we are. We are just 13 weeks to go until the Seder. Let's step away from the dichotomy of harder and easier. Let's talk about making it more real, more meaningful, more relevant. Of our many strengths as a people, getting out of narrow straits and difficult places, meitzarim, is one of those strengths. Another great strength we have is memory. The Baal Shem Tov says that memory is the secret of redemption. Another strength we have is telling the story. Who's better than us at telling stories and making that part of who we are? And also, really accepting and even embracing a diverse range of points of view and perspectives, even when they seem to challenge us in the most basic way, which is a great strength of ours. So, telling the story and talking about 4 kids with 4 questions, or 1 kid with 1 question, or even just ourselves with a lot of questions that come up and arise in our heads and our hearts from time to time, or all the time. That's all part of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the ongoing exodus from servitude to freedom that we experience not only on the Seder night or the Seder nights, but as the Haggadah itself says, quoting Ben Zoma, Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life. A good Shabbos.